Hello, everyone. It's Saturday. That means it's Chat with Mac. We're glad to have all of you join us. For those of you that have been with us, please continue to give us feedback. We really appreciate it. For those of you that are new to what we do, welcome, welcome, welcome. Hey, Nadeem, happy Saturday, sir.
Hey, yeah, great Saturday. How is your weekend going so far?
It's good. It's good. Settling in. I've been actually. There's something I want to ask you about. With the holidays coming up, I'm looking at new laptops, right? And so, we're a Microsoft. Gold Star. We do a lot of Microsoft products. And one of the things I've been hearing about as it pertains to the Microsoft Surface, is this whole time drifting thing that has been an issue within Microsoft Surface products. I use Microsoft for my everything. I mean, I use the hell out of this, so I'm surprised it's still even working. But yeah, I wanted to get your thoughts on there, some of the issues and some of the pluses, if you will, with the Microsoft Surface, but really addressing that time drift.
Yeah, so before we get into the time drift and specific issues, if somebody were to ask me what hardware do I recommend,
Hmm.
and I would, well, let me put it this way. So I would ask them the question, does it have to be a Windows machine,
Right,
right? If
right.
not, go with Apple hardware, right? But if it has to be Windows, uh, then I would say go with any of the Microsoft Surface line. Now, the thing about the Surface line is, I know if you search for it, you'll find issues, but that's a good thing. When somebody finds an issue, they make it a big issue because Microsoft Surface devices, let's face it, they're not the lowest cost devices out there, right? So when there is an issue and people have spent a bunch of money on their devices, it hurts them. So they want to be vocal about it and they want to get on Microsoft and say, hey, fix it. And the thing is, Microsoft fixes things via Windows updates, which is not true for all other hardware. So the first thing that I would recommend, if it has to be a Windows machine, yes, go with Microsoft devices if one of those devices fits your need, like a size, portability, those kind of things. Now, then we get into issues, right? So any hardware out there has problems. Even Apple devices have hardware issues. If it's hardware, it's made by humans. Sooner or later, you're going to have some issues, right?
That's true.
The good thing about Microsoft hardware is, unlike any other manufacturer like Dell or anybody else, Microsoft releases firmware updates in Windows updates. So like if you had a Dell, you would have to go to the Dell utility to download firmware updates for your Dell machine or HP machine or Lenovo machine, whatever your machine is. You would have to use your manufacturer utility to update the firmware. It's not going to come through Windows updates. For Microsoft Surface devices, all the firmware comes through the Windows updates. So you don't have to worry about installing any other application to update firmware, and it's seamless, right? So in Surface, if there is a firmware update, it will get the update, it will restart during the boot phase, it will update the firmware, it'll restart again. So it'll restart a few times, but it will update that firmware for you. And you can kind of tell when a certain firmware has been updated from the beep that it makes. It's a different beep that you'll hear. So the thing is, these fixes are coming in via Windows Update. If you have Windows Update enabled for automatic, on a weekly basis, then you don't have to worry about manually updating BIOS or firmware for the hard drive or the controllers or anything like that. It's all automatic. One of the problems that you mentioned specifically as far as time drift, we have seen quite a few Microsoft Surface machines, specifically the Surface Pros and the Surface Laptop 3 and some Laptop 4s, where if it is a domain joined machine, so this is not your individual machine, we haven't we don't work a lot with individual machines. Usually we work with on the enterprise side. So most of what we interact with are enterprise devices that are usually part of a domain. So these machines that are part of a domain, they have time drift. Now time drift is a well-known thing. It's if you've been working with computers, you've probably encountered it. If your time is off a certain amount, then you're not going to be able to access certain things. And so time is very important when it comes to computers. The problem that happens is if your time has drifted far enough, whether it went back in time or forward in time, from your domain itself. So your domain controller has its own internal clock, which is probably synced with the atomic clock. So your domain controller probably has very accurate time. If your machine now has drifted, let's say, a couple of hours, that machine is not going to be able to log into their domain. And that's when people have an issue and they call in for support. That's what we've encountered, is that time drift is like a few hours behind. The Surface devices fall a few hours behind, and because of that, the machine now cannot log into their domain. So that's now in the past, when something like this happened, it was usually, and I know what a lot of people out there are thinking, oh, hey, it's your CMOS battery, replace your battery, you'll be good. So in the past, typically it was, so computers used to have a lithium battery, those they look like a quarter, like a quarter. So they used to have those lithium batteries, which they're good for about 5 years, I believe. And well, they used to be, I don't know what it is now, but they used to be good for 5 years. Some machines even had rechargeable batteries in them. But that battery, when that battery started to get low on voltage, the machine time would be off. And typically when it's a battery issue, your machine will reset to its born date, the BIOS born date, which will be so many years in the past, right? So if your machine all of a sudden you power it up and it's like 1990 something, it's like, oh wow, that's probably the CMOS battery died. In this case, it's not the CMOS battery because it's just drift, and it's a few seconds, but then over time it starts to drift more and more. So when that drift is 30 minutes to an hour away from your actual domain controller time, your machine won't be able to log in. So that's we've run into an issue with that with several Microsoft products. The thing is, all these products were part of the domain. So I'm not sure if it's specific to machines that are in the domain for domain joined machines, or if it is also true for non-domain joined standalone machines. I just don't have the data, enough data for standalone machines. So that's the thing. The time does drift on these machines. Now, the question is, what happens when your machine's time has drifted enough to where you cannot log into the domain? What do you do? Normally, we fix it very easily because we have our management software on all these machines. We can connect to it. It's an out-of-band connection. So we can connect to that machine, update the time, and once the time is within a few minutes of the domain controller time, it will log in. As soon as the machine logs in, it will sync its time with the domain controller. Everything is good. The other thing is, a lot of times, if it's a standalone machine, Windows will try to sync its time with the atomic clock anyway. As long as you have internet, it will sync its time with the atomic clock. Everything is fine. Now, the question becomes, let's say you've been at home, you've been using your machine, everything is fine. There is time drift, but you didn't notice it, right? I mean, it happens. Now one day you go into the office and you try to log into the domain, you can't log in. The error is a very ambiguous error message. It's not going to be like, hey, your time is off, we cannot log you in. No, it's like a weird, unable to log into domain, some weird ambiguous message. And it's different for different versions of Windows. Anyway, so the thing is, you won't be able to log in. So what do you do in that case? Let's say you don't have an MSP that manages your machines where they have access to these machines to update the time on the back end. So in this case, here's what you want to do. Disconnect your machine from the network. So, if it's Wi-Fi, turn off Wi-Fi. If it's plugged in, unplug the network cable, restart the machine. Now you will be able to log into the machine locally with its locally cached credentials. So even if a machine is part of the domain, the machine caches credentials locally. So if there is no connectivity, you can still log in, right? Now, in that case, the machine now does not know what the domain controller time is because there is no connectivity to the domain controller. So now it's going to let you log in locally. Once you log in locally, you can set the time on your machine. You can just set it with your watch and then plug it back into the network, restart it, and now you'll be able to log into the domain again. This has been, it's not an isolated issue. We've encountered it at multiple sites all across the US. So it's not an isolated thing. We don't have specific word from Microsoft what it is, what causes it, or why is this an issue. And I think Microsoft will deny it up and down if you ask them. But well, like most companies out there, they're going to deny it unless the issue reaches a certain number of machines, and then it becomes public and they can't hide it anymore. But anyway, so the easy answer to fixing this is disconnect your machine from the network, log in locally, set the time, and then log into the domain, and everything is good. What we've done for certain customers where it was a continuous issue is we have set a manual workaround to force the machines to sync the time with the atomic clock even when they're not in the network. So normally Windows will, like in the Windows through the graphic interface, if you go in, you can set the atomic clock, but it will only set it if the time is within a certain threshold. So if it's too far off, it won't update the time. If it's not far off enough, it will not update the time. There's this window that it will update the time. So it kind of defeats the purpose, right? It's like, well, then why sync it, right? Well, the idea of the atomic clock sync in Windows is not to fix your time. It is to make sure that your time is within a certain threshold so you can communicate with other places. And what I mean by this is there are certain websites that you won't be able to log into if your time is far off enough from actual time. There are like domains you won't be able to log in if your time is far enough off that it doesn't match up with the domain controller. If it's a few minutes, no big deal. It's going to let you log in. And then usually when you log into the domain will update your time to current time. But if your time is far, like 3-4 hours behind or in future, it's not going to update the time. It's not even going to let you log in. So that's an issue that we've encountered with Microsoft devices. But that's will I still recommend Microsoft Surface devices? Absolutely. And the reason for that is there are a lot of other issues with pretty much any manufacturer out there. And I'm going to give you a little history of some of the people who know me. I didn't used to like Apple products. I used to think that Apple products were toys.
I remember that. You remember
and I've given you that story. Well, so there's a slightly different story. So I'm not going to tell you the story where I was driving to, I think, Corpus Christi and the iPhone thing that happened. No, I'm going to talk about another thing where before I got my first Apple Mac, and it was a MacBook Pro. Before I got my first Apple MacBook Pro, I used to have all kinds of different. Microsoft didn't have hardware at that point, but I used to have like HP, IBM. It wasn't Lenovo yet, it was IBM and Dell machines. So I used to have these machines. These were laptops, right? And a laptop would typically last me about a year. Every year I had to replace it because something would break. Either the display goes out or the keyboard acts funky. There was an HP machine, I remember, it used to shock me. I mean, literally. So it had a metal body, and when you would touch it a certain way, you could feel the electrical shock that so it was some kind of problem with it, which is really, I've never encountered a laptop shock you electrically, but it was an HP machine that used to do this. And then I remember there was an IBM machine that if I picked it up from one side, so if this is the machine, if I picked it up like from this side and I held it up like that and the display was open and it was running, it would blue screen. And the reason it did that, now, yeah, it doesn't make sense. So the reason it did that, I figured it out, was there was a hairline crack in the motherboard, and the body was plastic. So that portion, when you held it from one side, moved the crack enough to where it lost electrical signals going through the circuit board, blue screen of death. So I had, before my first MacBook Pro, I used to replace machines once a year. When I got my MacBook Pro, and I didn't even realize this, right? So I had my MacBook Pro for a few years, and my wife asked me, "You've had this machine for more than a year." And I was like, and then I calculate, and I had it for like close to 2 years. And I was like, wow, that's the difference. Because most of the other vendors, they were competing on price. Who can come in the lowest? Yeah. And Apple was not competing on price. They were like, let's build a quality product. Whatever the price is, we'll charge it, but let's make a quality product. And then later, Microsoft started making the Surface devices, and they went with the same theme as, okay, we're going to compete with Apple. We're not going to compete on price. We're not going to be the lowest cost manufacturer out there, but we're going to compete with the Apple products. So now I've had some issues with Microsoft Surface devices, but they're not like they only last me a year, right? So, I mean, I can go, I think, about maybe a little over 2 years on Microsoft Surface devices. This computer that I'm talking to you on right now, it's an iMac, and I can actually see which iMac it is, which I haven't even looked because it didn't give me any problems. So this iMac that we're on right now, it's a late 2014 iMac. 2014.
2014. Damn.
Yeah, so I can't even think of, so it's an iMac, but even my Microsoft Surface, so this is a Microsoft Surface Studio. It's fairly new. I think it might be a year old, maybe not. But the thing is that Microsoft devices are not where Apple is, but I think that has to do with not just the hardware, but also the software integration, right? Just Mac OS itself, which is BSD based, just runs so much better and not as resource intensive as some of the Windows devices. But besides that, I don't know what the reasoning behind it is. Maybe there's some pixie dust in it. I don't know. I don't care. All I know is that Apple devices that I've used, they usually last me a lot longer than devices from any other manufacturer. Number 2 in line is Microsoft devices. And I think it all comes down to, there can be a company, at some point that might say, okay, we're going to make Windows devices, but we're not going to try to compete on price. Let's make the best device we can make and then charge accordingly. And people like me, people like you will buy them because we need, these are our tools, and we need our tools to work all the time. We can't go on a service call and say, oh, by the way, my wrench is broken. We can't do that, so this is our wrench. We can't be walking around with a broken wrench. I would always recommend Microsoft devices right now, unless quality control starts to kind of lag. And if it does, hopefully somebody else will come in to fill the void. But right now, my first preference is Apple. My second preference is Microsoft devices. Now, of course, the question in everybody's mind is, well, what am I doing with this Microsoft Surface Studio? Why is it not a MacBook Pro, right? So this is a Microsoft Surface because Microsoft makes it very hard for me to buy an Apple product. I mean, I can go out and buy it, but Microsoft says, hey, you're a Microsoft partner, so we're going to give you a big discount. You're not going to want to refuse this, right? So I get even though the devices don't last me as long, but I still get more bang for the buck going with Microsoft because we are a Microsoft partner, and we do get internal use NFR products at huge discounts. So that's why I have a Microsoft Studio, and I have a few more up.
So with the holidays coming up, people like me, because I've had this going on. Man, I think I've had this going on 4 years. It's about that time. Um, but for what we do, I know you are partial to the Apple products. Are there, and now Surface, the Microsoft Surface has different models. Are there some models that are, I know the Studio is like the top of the top, I think, right?
Right.
Okay. Are there some are there some versions of the Surface that are top tier, mid tier, low tier that you recommend? Or yeah, I guess that's my
Well,
question.
so if you want the top tier, right? So the top tier is the Microsoft Surface Studio, the Studio laptop, not the
Mhm.
Studio, the all-in-one, not that one. But if you want a desktop all-in-one machine, then the Microsoft Surface Studio, the all-in-one. Now, if you want something in between there, so next level down from Microsoft Studio laptop would be just the Microsoft laptop, the threes and the fours. And you can get some really good deals on even some Microsoft laptop threes. I think some companies have them refurb for a bang up deal. So I would still get those because the firmwares are still being released for those devices, right? The laptop threes and the laptop fours. So I would look at laptop studio first. If that's over budget, I would look at laptop 4 or laptop 3. I will not look at Microsoft Surface Pro unless you are in need of a tablet, because keep in mind the Microsoft Surface Pro is a tablet first and a laptop second. It has that, that keyboard cover to make it a lap. It's really not a laptop because it's really hard to balance on your knees. It always topples over and the keyboard gets disconnected and everything just falls apart, right? So I would look for a laptop 3 or a laptop 4. And if you want to go higher end, I would go with a laptop studio. And in the laptop studio, I would go with the high end Core i7, just because it's going to give you 16 gig of RAM and on all that. But if it was laptop 4, I would get, now it's a toss up, right? So some of the lower end laptops you can get like with the Core i5, you can get with the passive cooling, so they don't have any fans. And the reason I like the idea of not having fans is, number one, the battery lasts longer. Number two, there's no noise, right? So sometimes when those fans kick in, they make
They're
some
loud.
noise, and
They're
it's
loud. Yeah.
it's very quiet, just because it's passive cooling. If you go the higher end processors like the Core i7s, you will not be able to find one without a fan because those processors just generate so much heat. You need fans and active cooling for that.
So I'm looking, as you were saying, I'm looking at the Service Laptop Studio as you were talking, and man, so apparently this is definitely built for performance. You can build apps, edit video, render animation. You can even play games, which games on laptops like this one notoriously bad unless you're actually doing PC game. As a gamer, I have to say that. So, but man, it's interesting. And this one has the quad core. I'm looking for the i7 that you were talking about, and I can't. I don't know if it has that on here on this specific model. Oh, it does. It does. Quad core powered 11 Gen Intel Core processor, second gen graphics card, i7. I mean, it has it all.
So here's the differentiator for Microsoft Surface Studio. Microsoft Surface Studio laptop is the only laptop in the Microsoft uh, lineup that has a discrete graphics processing unit, a graphics card. So all other laptops in the Surface Pros, they have built-in graphics controllers built into the board, right? The Intel graphics controllers. The Microsoft Surface Studio, the higher end models have a discrete, so they have the built-in graphics control, which it'll use for normal operations like word processing, whatever. But it also has a discrete NVIDIA graphic unit. So if you need that processing power for graphics, like playing games, it will automatically seamlessly switch over to the discrete graphics controller, just like the MacBook Pros. Remember back in the day when Apple came out with that?
I was just about to say that. Just about to say that. Yep.
Yeah. So originally, back in the day, a few, like this was a bunch of years ago, when Apple first came out of that, people were kind of like, well, how is that switch going to happen? And Apple proved it can work really well, and it did work really well. It was seamless switching as needed. And Microsoft has done the same thing with their Surface Studio, the high-end Surface Studios with the discrete GPUs. The switching is seamless, and if you are editing video or playing some high graphics games, you will not notice a difference. You'll just see that the shaders and all the graphics, you're using the graphics cores from the GPU as opposed to the CPU. So what that means is it's a much more efficient way to texture and render graphics.
Let me tell you, I did not know about this, and my God, I'm thinking I'm gonna have to save a little money to get this. This is nice. I mean, just reading all the specs that it has. This now I don't know if it's gonna topple a MacBook, but man.
Well,
Nice.
so that's a good question, right? So if it's a Apple Silicon MacBook Pro, nothing's going to touch it. That's their proprietary silicon that you cannot touch that.
Right.
But compared to like an Intel-based MacBook Pros and the studios, yeah, now you can start to compete. But Apple kind of wins out because they have a bang-up OS. That OS is so efficient.
It is.
You Windows just can't really touch it. However, if you're doing regular video editing and things like that, that discrete GPU makes all the difference in the world. And that's why I have the Microsoft Surface Studio, is because of that discrete GPU. Because when I'm editing video, like I could be in a conference somewhere and I have to edit a video real quick, like at night after the conference. And I can't be waiting around on a machine that's using CPU to, the difference is dramatic. We're talking about, you can, what it takes you an hour to render, you can do it within minutes on a discrete GPU. It's that big of a difference. And then on top of that, you can do it while you're running on battery because it's so efficient.
32 gig. Now this is the top of the top. 32 gigabytes of RAM, 2 terabytes SSD, NVIDIA GeForce, Intel Core i7. Oof, this has got me.
And while you're reading that up, let me just pull up my my laptop here and let's see what config I have. Now, the config that I have on this laptop Surface is going to be different, and this is of course I think a year or something old. But the reason it's going to be different is because this is an NFR unit, and NFR units will usually have higher spec than available for the general public. Consider these as demo units.
NFR?
Yeah, so NFR is not for resale. It's
okay.
They're like demo units, right? So if I go in here and I look at MS Info, so this is a 11th gen Intel i7, 3.3 gigahertz. It's got 32 gig of RAM. It's got, let's see here. Of course, it's got virtualization options, so it can run virtual machines. And let me look at the hardware resources here. So as far as, I want to look at the display. So as far as display goes, it's got the NVIDIA RTX A2000 laptop GPU. And that's the discrete GPU that really makes a big difference when it comes to editing video. And of course, playing games. If you're into games, yeah, it's going to make a big difference. It's got one gig of RAM just for the video. It's not a lot by desktop standards, but for a laptop, that's quite a bit of RAM. And on top of all that, it still has the Intel Iris built-in video as well. So you have the Intel Iris built in, and then you have the NVIDIA laptop. Oh, I'm sorry. The built-in has the 1 gig of RAM, and it doesn't tell me what the NVIDIA has, but I'm thinking it's probably the 2 gig version. It doesn't tell me that much detail. But the adapter RAM for the built-in Intel Iris graphics adapter is 1 gig. I don't know why it doesn't tell me the NVIDIA's, but we can probably look up the specs and find out. Oh, no, it is 1 gig for the NVIDIA as well, but it has a lot more cores, so that's what makes the difference.
Gotcha.
But the thing is, it's you know, the reason I say Microsoft makes it very hard for us to buy anything else is because this unit, top of the line unit, will cost me a little less than what the entry level Apple MacBook Pro will cost me. So it's really a no-brainer for me, right? Just get the NFR and just call it a day. Yeah, it may be not as efficient, but who cares? But the idea of custom silicon, Apple's custom silicon, is intriguing. And I've actually thought about this because if I don't have a place to plug in, let's say at a conference and all the plugs are taken, which happens a lot of times, being able to edit that video on battery alone, it's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
But yeah, so if you can, there is an advantage to using Apple products, but if you have to have a Windows machine, go with the Microsoft line.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, so to me it doesn't matter. I mean, we're a Dell partner, we're a Lenovo partner, we're an HP partner, and we're also a Microsoft partner. The thing is, yeah, so in Dell, you can go with some of the high-end Alienware machines. But even those machines, we've had some issues with. And the problem is then, how good of support are you going to get from the manufacturer? And then even if you get good support, how easy is it to implement firmware updates for the hardware that's in that machine? For me, it's not a big deal. I can always install it or manually install firmware updates. But for end users, that's a game changer, being able to seamlessly get Windows updates and all your firmware updates in one fell swoop. That's a game changer. And that's the same thing that Apple does, right? Apple updates, firmware updates come from Apple updates. It's a part of the process. You don't have to worry about separately installing firmware. And that's what kind of the way the Microsoft is going. And that really makes it easier for the end user, for the consumer to manage and maintain their machine.
Gotcha. This is good. This is good. Now this gives me, I'm really, really, really leaning towards that Microsoft Studio laptop.
And not only that, so if you do go with the Microsoft Studio, I would say get like a USB-C hub, right? Get a USB-C hub, because these machines don't have a built-in Ethernet adapter, which for you probably don't need. You're probably going to use Wi-Fi, but it also will let you have multiple display ports, HDMI ports or display ports. And what that does is allows you to drive multiple 4K monitors from your laptop.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can drive four 4K monitors at once with this laptop. Now, if you're into gaming, that might be what you want.
Yeah. So if I'm in a short battery, let me make sure I understand this. With the Microsoft Studio laptop, I'm able to plug in a 4K adapter into a bigger monitor and run simultaneous.
So the hub that I mentioned, the USB-C hub, that is not required. If you have a DisplayPort monitor that can be daisy changed, so you can have, there's monitors that can be daisy chained together, then your one built-in USB-C port, which, you have two built-in USB-C ports on the Surface, so you can drive multiple monitors by daisy chaining them together. But having this USB-C hub makes it so much easier, because I got regular USB ports here, I've got HDMI here, I've got USB and USB-C here, I've got Ethernet over here, I've even got a VGA port over here, the old style VGA. So I've got all those ports right here, and all I need to do is plug in one cable, not even power, doesn't need power, just plug in one cable into the USB-C port, and now I have all the connectivity that I need. So I always carry one of these with me, because it doesn't matter what laptop you have. Pretty much any laptop nowadays is going to have a USB-C port on there, but you're not going to have network port on there. You're not going to have VGA port on there. You're not going to have possibly HDMI ports on there. And then of course, you plug in a keyboard, you plug in a mouse, you've taken up all your ports, right? It's not
Right.
going to have that many ports. With this one, you got plenty of ports to go around. So that makes life a lot easier. So I think with that, Mac, we'll call it a day. We've kind of killed it on hardware today. I don't think we've ever had a call about hardware before.
Not like this, nah. Yeah. This is good.
So,
and
but yeah, and maybe one day we'll talk about how I got exposed to working with hardware. I was still in high school back then. So, it's 1989, I think. So we'll talk about that another time.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Have a great day, and hope everybody enjoys their weekend, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.